So I've got the bow roughed out down to my line that I drew here, or pretty close. So I've got it in the ballpark. I've got it flexing just a little bit, which is just where I wanted to be. And so now I need to be ignoring the line now. That just kind of got me in the ballpark, but I'm going to be using my fingers now. I'm just going to run my fingers along the length of the bow, and your fingers are actually quite sensitive and can tell you whether something's too thick or too thin, and they're going to be my primary tool for tillering this bow almost all the way through the process. I'll be using my eyes as well to analyze the bend, but my fingers don't lie to me as much as my eyes do. So right now what my fingers are telling me is that the thinnest spot right now is down here, which is not what I want. I want this to be the thickest spot, so I'm going to be reducing quite a bit of wood out here so that I can make a smooth transition down to thinner out here at the tips. So I've got a lot of wood to take off in here, and then on this limb it's similar, just not quite as pronounced. There's kind of a big hump out here that I need to work down. So my goal right now is just still pretty bulk wood removal. You know, I'm not anywhere near getting this bow really bending, so I can still be fairly aggressive at this point. But I want to make sure that every bit of wood that I'm taking off is actually helping me get towards having a good taper and a well-tillered bow. I'm not just ripping wood off indiscriminately at this point. I'm staying away from certain areas like this spot here to get everything else in line with it. So from here on out, I'm always going to be removing wood with real careful purpose, even if it looks like I'm taking a lot off at once. Alright, here's my thin spot. I'm going to put a big X to remind myself that I don't want to take wood out of that spot. I do need to reduce it here a little bit where this knot is. That's going to be some rasping work, but for now I'm going to focus on getting this area out here in line with the place just out of the phase there. Instead of taking big curls at this point, I'm just kind of chipping away at it. It's still fairly rapid wood removal, but it's a little bit more calculated. So I'm noticing that it's a lot thinner on this edge than it is on this edge, so I need to focus on taking some wood off over here. It's always a good idea to stop every once in a while and just check your progress. It's easy to get carried away just taking wood off and kind of zone out, and then too late you come and check and you see that you've created another problem when you were trying to solve one. So err on the side of caution and check more often than not. Now when I lay out the bow on the back, you know, I have it reduced down to these 1/2 inch wide tips, but that's quite a bit wider than I'm actually going to have them when I'm all finished. And so I have to be careful at this stage that I'm not making the tips too thin, because I'm going to be making them quite a bit narrower, which is going to reduce the width in this tapered area here as well. So I like to leave things a little bit thicker out here than it seems like I need to, and then when I bring that bring the width in a little bit later, I won't run into any trouble with that. But right now, okay, let's check and see how it's feeling now. It's a lot better. There's still some lumps in there, but it's getting closer. So like I said, my goal right now is just to get a nice, basic, even taper with no obvious thick spots or thin spots. After I do the same to the other limb, I'm going to floor tiller it again. So I'll meet back up with you when I'm So I've made some progress. I've got it down so that it's tapering pretty nicely. It's not perfect yet, but in general it goes from thick down to thinner. And you can see it's starting to flex a little bit more. It's too really early to tell much from the way that it's bending. I can tell a lot more just from feeling it, but we're off to a good start. I'm just going to keep reducing the wood on the belly more and more carefully as I go along, taking less and less wood off. Probably going to be switching away from the draw knife here pretty soon. The draw knife was the perfect tool to get me to where I am right now, but it gets increasingly riskier to use as the bow starts to bend more, because if I take a chunk out now with the draw knife, it could really ruin the bow at this point. So I'm probably going to be doing more work with the farrier's rasp. And another thing that I need to be thinking about here soon is, I don't know how well you can see it, but this bow is not perfectly straight. The string alignment is going to be favoring this side the way that it is right now, and so pretty soon here I'm going to round the handle off a little bit more so there's not quite so much meat there, and then I'm going to heat this up and we're going to bend the bow to straighten it out, and I'll show you how I do that. Alright, I'm going to get back to taking some more wood off here. I'll let you see what I'm doing. This knot here is making this area quite a bit thicker than this area. I'm going to work this down some so they're more evenly matched. The sooner you can get on top of discrepancies like that and get them kind of evened out, the better off you'll be. If you put that sort of thing off too long into the process, you can run into trouble later when you're making big adjustments. So another thing that I'm looking for right now is just all around symmetry. Sometimes, like, I think I'll have to measure it, but I think the bow is maybe a little bit narrower here than it would be on the corresponding side over here, so I'm going to have to adjust the width of the bow a little bit to accommodate that. Like I said before, I laid this out with a pretty generous width. I don't think the bow needs to be quite that wide for this build, so if I end up a little bit narrower than 1 3/4 inch width, then I'm going to be just fine. This might be a good time to talk about knots. Different species of wood tolerate knots differently. This is a bit of a worrisome knot. I feel like if there's a spot on this bow that's going to challenge the integrity of the bow, it's going to be right here. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on this. I'm probably going to take some runny super glue and run it down in all the crevices of it just to kind of shore up the weak spots of that knot. But I'm hoping that it'll be okay where it's at. There's only one way to find out. You know, there's not very many perfect staves out there. Yew is pretty tolerant of knots. I've gotten away with some pretty gnarly spots on yew bows and haven't had any trouble, but it doesn't mean that it can't be trouble. You always want to leave the area around a knot a little bit thicker to add support to that spot in case there's any weakness in that area. It's really a case-by-case basis depending on the stave and the bow. That's one of the things that makes making self bows interesting, is you just have to work with the wood that you've got, and you don't always get to dictate exactly what a bow is going to be like. It's kind of a relationship with the wood, and you get to add your own thoughts and ideas to it, but you also have to listen to the wood, because if you don't, then you're going to run into trouble at some point. I think this is maybe a good time to start working on the handle, just because I'm going to be bending it here and I don't want these sharp edges, so I'm going to round things off a little bit. I've started working on my handles sooner than I had in the past. I used to leave them like this pretty well into the tillering process before, mainly because I didn't want to put work into the handle if I didn't know the bow was going to be alright, and also when you're using a tillering tree it's kind of nice to have this flat surface here. But the downside to waiting is that if you get the bow bending quite a bit and you don't do anything with the handle, and then you come in later and you do a whole bunch of work to this area, to the handle and the fades, it might have a bigger impact on your tiller than you were anticipating, and you don't want to find that out at the very end of your tillering process. So I tend to kind of pick away at the handle. I'll do a little bit at this stage, you know, still leaving it pretty bulky and rough, but kind of getting into a basic shape so that I can shape my fades a little bit better. And then later on in the process I'll refine it a little bit more, and then I'll do all the fine-tuning with it at the end. So I'm just going to kind of gently take off the corners here. And start working them down with the rasp a little bit. I don't have a lot of thickness in this handle. I'm not going to take much off the top here at any point. Right now I'm just doing some rounding more than anything. I'm a big fan of round edges on my bows. I don't like a lot of sharp corners on my bows. I feel like they're a potential weak point, and I just don't like the way they look. Some people like to make more square bows, but for me I like to have lots of round contours. Wasn't supposed to rain today, but that's Oregon for you. Hopefully you can hear me over the rain. I'll try to speak up. This is another tool that I like to use. It's called a microplane. It's pretty good for handle shaping and that sort of thing. When I'm working on the handle, I like to just take a little bit off here and there, flip it around, work on the other side. I think it's dangerous to try to take one spot down to where you think it's going to want to be at the end, because you can end up with things being asymmetrical and you don't have any wood left to adjust with. So I tend to take a kind of holistic approach to making my handle just little bits here and there, working it down, judging the shape, feeling it with my hand. So on this handle, and you can kind of see here on the back, it's going to be a little bit thinner here at each end of the handle, and it's going to be a little bit thicker here in the middle. It doesn't show up really well right now, but that's going to become more pronounced as I work on it. I'm going to be focusing most of my wood removal here on the edges and keeping it a little bit bulbous here. And that's just a style preference. There's a lot of different handle styles out there, and you can make what you'd like. Got it worked down some more, cleaned up a little bit with the rasp so that there's not a lot of big heavy tool marks on here from the draw knife. And my taper is feeling a lot more consistent on both limbs. I fixed the width discrepancy a little bit. I brought this down. This was about 1 3/4 here, and this was actually a little bit wider. I must have been a little bit generous outside of my lines when I was roughing it out, so I brought this down to match this side a little bit better. Got the handle certainly not down to its final dimensions yet, but a little bit more contoured, so it'll be ready to bend there. And I can kind of start to look at how the bow is bending. I kind of look down the limb as I'm bending it, and I can get a vague sense of whether it's bending evenly or not. But I don't put a lot of stock into what I'm seeing right now. It looks fine to me, and what's more important right now is that the taper feels right. If the taper's right, then the bend is going to be right. So the next step, when I've got the bow bending about this much, then the next thing that I need to look out for is this sharp corner on the back of my bow here. I don't want to have a sharp corner on the back of my bow, because when the bow starts to bend more, then that's a potential place that I could pop a splinter. And so I'm going to take my rasp and my scraper, and I'm going to round this off to about the diameter of a pea. And that'll get me a much safer back to work with as I continue to bend the bow more. So let me show you what that looks like here. Probably could skip right to the scraper, but I like the consistency that the fine side of my Farrier's rasp gives me. You could use any kind of file or rasp to do it, but I'm just going to be lightly and consistently taking off this corner. And then I can just come back. Oh, got crud on my scraper. And clean it up so it's nice and smooth. I don't want to be scraping the back. The back is perfect. I don't want to mess that up. Speaking of that, you want to be really careful as you're working, especially with yew, because the sapwood is fairly soft. But whatever you're clamping it down in to work it needs to protect the back. This is a stave master designed and made by Keenan Howard, specifically for making bows, and it's got these rubber pads all along here to protect the bow really well, so I don't have to think about it too much while I'm working. But if you're working with bench vices and clamps and stuff like that, you always need to be making sure that you're protecting the back from getting dinged and nicked. You'll be glad you did. Alright, I'm going to finish cleaning up these edges and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, I've got the edges rounded off nice and smooth, clean up the sides a little bit. So now I can bend this bow with a little bit more surety, not worrying about the edges so much. Still pretty stiff, but the weight will start coming off fast as we're reducing the belly. Now, decided that I'm going to put some super glue in these knots, the two big knots that have been giving me trouble. So I'm just going to, careful not to pour it all over my hands, I'm just going to soak with some really thin runny super glue. I'm just going to soak that knot, let it seep down into all the crevices, just to give it a little bit more security. Let's see. The other knot. I'm gonna wait till the glue on this one dries a little bit. I don't like the glue running on the back because then I've got to clean it up and I don't want to scrape up the back of the bow at all. So I'm just going to let this sit here for a minute. Alright, I'm going to hit this other knot here with some super glue. Really all this is doing is just kind of securing the bond between the knot and the surrounding wood a little bit more, so that if it was so inclined, it's not going to come loose from its moorings. Before I correct the string alignment, I just want to show you what I'm looking at so you know what I'm dealing with. If you look down the length of the stave here, you can see that it curves off to the right ever so slightly. It's not bad, but it means that when the bow gets strung, the string's going to lay off to one side. What I want the string to do is to go straight through the center of the handle. So I'm going to use some heat, and I'm going to heat up the handle section, and I'm going to bend it so that the bow will hopefully be perfectly straight when I'm done. So let me show you how I do that. Let me show you my setup here. I'm going to try to keep things simple in this video so that hopefully anybody can do it with a limited amount of tools. So I've got a bench vise here on a table. I've got this form here, or caul. I'm not using any of the curvature on it right now. I'm just kind of using it as a board, a platform to clamp things down onto. So I've got my bow clamped onto the caul here. I've got two pieces of kind of soft bark just to provide some lift here, because I'm going to be clamping this section down, so I want to create some space here so there's room for this to come down a little bit. I'm using some pieces of bark that I found on the ground that are substantial enough that they're not just going to get crushed and cracked, but that they're soft enough that they're not going to damage the bow wood. So be careful that you're not using a harder wood than your bow. It's all kinds of things you could use for that, but that's just what I found on hand. I made a little arrow here reminding myself that I want the handle to go this way to correct the alignment. I heard from a friend that if you don't mark this, then you might get the bow turned around and forget about which way you were supposed to be clamping it, and actually correct the alignment in the wrong way and make things worse. I've never done that, of course, but I heard it from a friend, so I recommend putting a little mark on there just to keep you on track. Now, it's important to note that I've got the belly side facing me here. I'm going to use tangled up here. I'm going to use a heat gun. Pardon the power tool action here. I know that I'm trying to stick mainly to hand tools on this build. I could use steam. I could put that over some boiling water for 20 minutes or half an hour to get it really hot, and then stick it on here quick and clamp it down, and that would work perfectly fine. I just opted for the heat gun. This is a really useful tool. They're not very expensive. I think I maybe paid like 15 bucks for this thing, and it's lasted for about 8 years so far and isn't showing any sign of quitting. So if you're gonna buy a select amount of power tools for bow building, I recommend a heat gun. It has a lot of useful applications. So I'm gonna get my clamp ready here. So obviously I don't want to use a plastic or rubber clamp on this spot because I'm going to be heating this up and I don't want to melt my clamp. So these metal clamps work well for that. So I'm not going to crank it down super far, just kind of get it with some downward pressure on it. And now I'm just going to turn the heat gun on high. I'm going to have, I don't know, maybe about 5-inch distance between the heat gun and the stave, and I'm just going to heat up this handle section here, from this fade to this fade, and I'm going to keep the gun moving, back and forth, moving around so that I'm not scorching any one spot. It takes a little while to heat such a thick area thoroughly enough that I can really compress it down and get it to stay. If I have the gun too close, I'm going to burn the outer wood, but I'm not going to have enough time to heat up the inner wood. So you're going to have to kind of play around with it. It's going to get really hot to the touch so that you can't have your hand on it. And then I'm just going to kind of heat it up till it's starting to get pretty warm on the back, that I feel like the heat has penetrated through. And once I get it good and hot, I'm going to start cranking this down a little bit. I'm just going to kind of use my judgment on how far I need to crank it down. I don't have a lot of correction that I need to do, so I'm just going to do it a little bit, knowing that it's going to revert back a little bit the way that it was. It's not going to hold everything that I give it. So Alright, I'm going to crank this down some more. Not that I think what I'm going to do right now is really pushing the limits of this wood, but I always like to keep a sharp eye out for any distress in the woods, any sign of failure or cracking. I keep an ear out, but I'm really not asking a lot from this piece here. Just a couple other notes on this. I want to reiterate the point that I'm only heating the belly of the bow. I'm never going to directly heat the back of the bow, as it could compromise the tension strength of the back of the bow and potentially cause failure to the bow. So we always heat the belly. The reason I'm doing this correction in the handle as opposed to further out in the limb is because only a small amount of movement here in the handle is going to make a bigger difference out in the tips, and so I don't have to do as much bending if I'm doing it here in the handle. And also, this isn't a working part of the bow, so I don't have to really have any worries about when the wood is ready to work again after I've heated it up. I can just kind of heat this up, wait till it cools, take it off the clamp, and if the correction turned out just like I wanted, I can just keep going with my tillering. I'm going to look down the length of the bow and kind of get a ballpark. So right now it's looking like it's just about straight, and so that means that I want to bring it a little further past straight, because you always lose a little bit of what you heat into a bow. So I'm gonna give it some more heat here, just to be sure. Alright, I think that's going to be plenty hot to set the bend. So I'm going to let this cool until it's totally cool to the touch, and then we'll take it out of the clamps and see if I got it straight. So the bow is off the form, and as you can see, it's just about perfect, straight as an arrow, and I'm ready to start tillering the bow. Now it's possible that things could shift a little bit as I'm working, so I'll just keep an eye on the alignment. You know, once I get the bow braced, I'll have a better idea of what the alignment is. Things might need to get tweaked a little bit down the road, but this is a good place to start.